can't tell you how excited I am to see this house. It's so beautiful.
Honestly, you can look at any room you like. No holds barred.
You're my dream hostess. Thank you.
I always say to people when they come over, I'm like, just have a look around. Walk around Rome. I actually left Mel B in here and went out to work.
Did you actually?
When she was on the podcast.
How long was she here for? Is she still here?
No, she's not here anymore, but she was just like, can I get some bits? I said, just stay as long as you like.
That's so nice.
To you, she's an acclaimed novelist, journalist and non-fiction author. She became a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2024. High praise. She's the host of the wildly successful podcast How to Fail, where she celebrates the things in life that haven't gone right with an array of fabulous guests, including me. Her podcast prowess knows no bounds as she launches her brand new podcast, How to Date, in February this year. I'm hoping to sink my teeth into some of your dating nightmares today, Elizabeth. But to me, she was my introduction to podcasting, and this show actually wouldn't exist without her. Before she invited me onto How to Fail, I'd never even listened to a podcast, and she made it such an enjoyable experience, and I loved the format that I decided to start my own. So thank you very much to the awesome and inspiring Elizabeth Day.
That is so lovely. I didn't know that.
It's true.
I'm so honoured. Thank you. That means so much to me.
Well, you opened up the format to me, so thank you.
It's a pleasure. Also, that's the first time I've had the Royal Society of Literature in an introduction, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
you should be.
I don't get to use it enough. It's like, should I put letters after my name?
Yes.
No, because then I'd seem like a twat.
When did you fall in love with podcasting, do you think?
I can date it really exactly. And I listened to Serial, the first season of Serial, when it came out. So that was probably the first podcast I listened to. And that was narrative true crime. And I was kind of blown away by it. But it didn't make me listen to more podcasts in the same genre. It was just, that was a standalone. But when I really got into the form was when I finally got an Apple phone. And I finally understood that I just had to click on the podcast icon and then I could listen. And that happened at the end of 2017. And the reason I can date it so exactly is because I'd gone through a really difficult breakup a month previously. And then I went to LA to kind of put myself back together, and I couldn't listen to any music because it felt like it had particular pertinence to my heartbreak. Yeah. You know that thing where you think you're starring in your own indie movie?
Yeah, and everything like, you're like, he used to.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like Kesha, and you're like, yeah, yes, Kesha, sing it.
He loves this song.
100%. So I started listening to podcasts, and I started listening to Esther Perel's podcast, Where Should We Begin? And that blew my mind because it made me realize that it is such an intimate and unique form. The kind of conversations you could have in the podcast space were not the kind that I was being commissioned to write in the newspaper space. So at that time, I was a newspaper interviewer, and I really wanted to do something in podcasting. And so that's how I fell in love with the genre. And then I launched How to Fail in July 2018.
And it's absolutely brilliant. I've listened to all of them since
Have you
coming
actually?
on it. Yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yes.
Well, you were an amazing guest.
Thank you. Hopefully you will be, but
I
let's
know.
see.
The pressure.
So let's start with Mad. You've spoken a little bit about double standards.
Yes, let me be the first person to say that I think there are double standards when it comes to men and women. And I suppose I've definitely noticed that in the podcasting space, actually, which is why I'm so thrilled that you're launching your own. Because although great strides have been made in the rest of society, it feels like podcasting in the UK, the top of the charts, is still overwhelmingly dominated by white, middle-aged, middle-class men who are mostly talking to each other about each other. And I don't really understand why that is. And that's one of the things that has made me mad.
I would like to know, have you ever met a woman who hasn't experienced double standards? And in particular, I've never met a woman who's not experienced sexual assault or inappropriate sexual comments or whatever. Like when we talk about double standard, that jumped out into my head.
Totally.
I've never, it was funny when the MeToo campaign came out and people were like, oh my God, this scandal. And it was like, oh no, but we've all been living with that our whole lives. Like I've never met a woman who's not been sexually assaulted or abused or groped or commented on or worse. Not a single one.
I think you're completely right. And I was about to say exactly the same thing about the Me Too movement, because I don't think I have met a woman who hasn't experienced double standards in some way. However, I know that I've met women who don't categorize their experience as a double standard because of the way that we've been raised, the way that we've been socially conditioned, so many
Yeah.
of us, is to accept sexism as the price of admission. And so when Me Too happened, and actually it happened at the time I was just talking about when I started listening to podcasts, I was in LA when it was really gathering pace
Mm.
in kind of late 2017. And I was witnessing all of these tweets go out into the world saying, Me Too, this happened to me. And I thought to begin with, well, I'm really lucky because I've never been the target of a horrendous sexual assault. And then the more that I was reading about other women's experience, the more I realized that I had also experienced what they were talking about.
Yeah.
It's just that I hadn't categorized it in that way. I had just accepted it and been conditioned to accept it
Yeah.
as part of being a woman. And so that was a really revolutionary moment for me, actually, where I looked back at my past and I thought about my early experiences as a print journalist, in the kind of ailing days of Fleet Street. So I entered newspapers in 2001, and it was still, a lot of it was an old boys club, and there was still, sexual comments, groping, sort of assumptions about how you got to where you got to, all of that sort of stuff just happened, and
Yeah.
I thought it was normal, and it made me really
Or at
reassess my
times you
past.
even saw it maybe as a compliment.
Yeah.
Like, because I look back and I thought, oh, I used to think that was quite nice, like not
Yeah.
nice, but a bit playful and a bit like gives you a boost. But actually, it's terrible.
Yes, and I think that's the thing. We can lie to ourselves
Yeah.
and tell ourselves it's playful. And then if we're really honest, actually there's part of us that's scared. Or there was part of me that was scared, which was, well, let me treat this as playful and flirty so that I don't anger this particular man.
Because I might lose my job or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the key. It's where the power dynamic is. And so if someone is in a position of power over you, whether that's because of their role at work or whether that's because of their gender and their place in society, that's when the quote unquote playful flirting can become something so much more devastating.
Mm.
And so I think we've all absolutely experienced that. And I've really enjoyed being taught by younger women,
That
by my
that's not
younger sisters.
acceptable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like I had with this whole Giselle Pellicott case, which was horrendous. I had like a flashback to a time when I was younger and I went out and I had half a glass of wine and then I can't really remember what happened after that. And I woke up naked in someone's bed. And only now that I'm an adult and that I'm talking about that case, do I worked out what might have happened,
Oh,
because I have
no.
flashbacks and I have moments where I remember my face being on the floor of a bar, like floor which was nearby where he lived, and then I remember like some other things like staggering. And then I remember naked. And I woke up and I said to the person who I knew, oh, did we do anything? And he was like, no, no, no. I said, why am I naked? And he said, oh, I just thought you'd be more comfortable sleeping without your going out clothes on. And then I staggered home and vomited for 3 days. And I just didn't think anything of it until this case. And then you go, oh my God, that might have probably was.
Paloma,
I was drugged.
I'm so sorry. That's
I know, but
horrendous.
that's the kind of thing we're talking about, though,
Yeah.
where we just naturally go, oh, move on, because there's no memory of it. Like, and then you're like, oh my God, that's horrendous.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say again, like, how sorry I am that you went
Oh,
through that really traumatic experience.
yeah, but it's weird because I don't have a memory of
I
it. So,
know. And also weird that it came up because of
a
Giselle
case.
Pellicourt. And so clearly you had buried it completely understandably. And our bodies are so clever in the way that they deal
Mm.
with trauma. But that must require a lot of unpacking. And I'm really sorry that happened to
Oh,
you.
thank you.
And I think there is still a really harmful tendency to look to blame someone, and very often it's the woman who's blamed. And that's why it is so difficult to prosecute rape cases, for
Mm.
instance, because women are only too aware that they might be put on the stand and have their personal lives trawled and
And by
have.
the time they're on the stand, they've probably had to repeat the story a good sort of 30 times before they've even got to the stand stage,
And as you've just
which is
shown,
traumatic.
which is traumatic, and as you've just shown, trauma also has a way of blanking out and fragmenting your memories. So
Mm.
it's very difficult sometimes to make a coherent narrative. And examples such as judges blaming what the survivor of sexual assault was wearing, all of this stuff is so embedded in how we treat women.
I was going to ask you about, when it comes to sort of double standards in the public eye, I guess you could sort of align it with a witch hunt in a way. Like, so
Mm,
if you observe like the way that the media would report on a woman, for example, I've got a little list like would report on a woman who was a high achiever or an adulteress or used alcohol or drugs or was not a great parent or
yeah.
whatever is so much different to if a male like person, public facing person was reported on, they'd be like, oh, he's off the rails again. No mention of the fact that he's a father or like
Yes.
all these things like, oh, he's had a separation from his wife. No mention of the fact that he had affairs constantly or whatever. But if it was a woman, she'd be made like a spectacle of in a sort of witch hunty,
One
quite medieval way.
100%. And I think what links all of this is shame and blame. And in terms of double standards in public life, I've seen it recently with certain A-list male celebrities who have been accused of, and obviously it's an allegation, of abuse. And yet they are still heralded on the red carpet and they're still getting front covers. And if that were a female celebrity, it would absolutely be totally different.
The career would be over.
Your career would be over. And if you look at the unbelievably tragic case of Caroline Flack, sometimes it's not just the career that ends.
Yeah.
And that was someone, again, who was so horribly pilloried for having made a mistake. And I think so much about her family and the grief they must go through every single day,
Mm.
knowing how their daughter and their sister was treated by the media. And again, you look at political leaders, Boris Johnson, no one knows how many children he has exactly. And that's somehow okay?
And also laughed about as a bit of a joke.
Yes, because his
Yeah.
hair's all messy and isn't he a character?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think, and this isn't a political statement, so no matter what you think of their politics, Theresa May and Liz Truss would not have got away with that.
No.
Can you imagine? I mean, yeah.
Yes. Such a great point. I agree.
So that definitely makes me mad. And the other thing that makes me mad, although she's on one now, is that women have to be careful about how they express their anger. Because if they express their anger in a way that isn't deemed sort of palatable, then you get labeled crazy or witch-like or hysterical. And as you know, the word hysterical comes from the Latin for womb. So it's this sense that we are just sort of at the behest and mercy of our crazy female ways and
Or
hormones.
hormones. Yeah. Everyone's blaming hormones.
Yes. And actually, very often, I think anger is so powerful and is a way.
And healthy.
It's so healthy.
In some forms.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
healthy. And sometimes it's all we have in order to protect ourselves.
You mentioned at some point that you were prone to road rage.
Yes.
Do you?
Yes.
Do you feel like that's healthy anger?
I actually do, Paloma.
Good. Tell me about
I do,
it.
because
Is that where you take your actual literal anger
Yeah.
and then find a place for it?
Yes.
Which is probably quite good for you.
I think it's quite healthy.
Neurologically, I think.
Exactly. I'm someone who was raised never really to show my anger. And very often when that happens, you turn it inwards and you start hating yourself. And as I've grown older, I've understood how rage can actually be really healthy. And it can also be showing you something that needs to change in your life. However, I'm not always able to express it easily. And so when I get behind the wheel of a car, and actually, I don't even have to be driving, I'm also a really, really supportive passenger because I'll be like, if anyone cuts in front of me or just treats me badly on the road, I will use swear words that you have never heard of in like 8 different languages. It suddenly just all comes out of me.
You're fluent in
I'm
swearing in
fluent in
many.
swearing behind the wheel of a car. Yes. And that's where it all comes out. And then I park the car badly and close the door, and then I'm just calm again.
Have you ever been accused of being mad when you're in your road rage state?
I think I think some people are kind of taken aback because it
Quite
seems so
brilliant.
unlike me. So yeah, I've definitely had partners be like, "Oh my God, calm
Oh,
down."
so you'll do it even with a passenger in
Yo,
tow.
yes. I want to make clear I've never got out of the car
Yeah.
and got physical. It's
And got your
purely
spray can
verbal.
out.
It's
She's
purely
such a
verbal
thing.
anger. Actually, the other thing that enrages me sometimes is when I'm walking along a crowded street and there's someone walking so slowly in front of me and not paying attention to the space around them. And sometimes I will mutter under my breath and I think it's internal and it's not. And sometimes I will mutter more
Turn around.
loudly. Yeah, some various swear words. And I have had people turn around and be like, all right.
Do you get worried?
All right, love.
Or are you
Do I
ready
get
for action?
I then feel immediately apologetic.
Yeah.
This is the most British thing about me. Feel immediately apologetic and like, oh my God, I hope they didn't realise that it's like How to Fail's Elizabeth Day. Who's meant to be really touchy-feely and nice.
Which you can be. You're multiple.
Yes, we contain multitudes, Paloma, you're so right.
Yes. I'm going to move on to sad.
Okay.
It's a big jump.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell me what was your really sad thing?
I think sadness, like rage, gets a bad press in that I think that there are people who live their lives trying to avoid it, and that's completely understandable because who wants to feel sad or in pain? And yet, there's something about living with the experience of sadness that has taught me so much about life. And that's why I can talk about it and why I'm actually, ironically, really happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
And my biggest sadness is the fact that I don't have children and I won't ever have children. And I had 12 years of unsuccessful fertility treatment and recurrent miscarriage, which I know we've spoken about before. And the saddest point was at the end of those 12 years, my partner and I decided to do a round of egg donation. And we went to a clinic in LA, which came highly recommended and was on the cutting edge of this kind of fertility medicine. And the process of finding an egg donor in and of itself was very stressful and also emotional, extremely emotional. There's a lot of stuff that you have to come to terms with when you're doing it. But we went through all of that and I was doing all of the quote unquote right things. You know, I was eating well, I was taking the drugs, I wasn't meditating. Why was I about to say that? I was about to lie about the fact that I was meditating. I wasn't meditating.
You were doing very holistic.
I was doing very holistic things. I was having acupuncture. I'd been to a shaman, like all of that sort of stuff. And then we went through the process and I was getting all of the pregnancy symptoms. And so I really thought, okay, this is it. And this is why we had to go through all of this stuff in advance of this experience. It's because this is the child, this is the baby. And then, as anyone who has done a similar thing will know, there's a 2-week wait. It was actually 10 days for us. And then I went back to the clinic and I had my bloods taken. And then later that day, I got an email from the clinic saying, "You're not pregnant, cease all medication." And it was so brutal. And I cannot believe that they told me by email. I still can't really get
Did
over
they
that.
know it was your last
No.
try?
And actually, I didn't know that it was at the time either. But that was really difficult and devastating. And I was in LA and Justin, my partner, had to come back for work, and so I was there on my own. And I'm lucky that I have amazing friends there, and one of them, Joan, made me a massive vodka martini after I got the email, because I hadn't been drinking. And I remember I hadn't been drinking over Christmas, and for someone who does like the odd dirty martini, a sober Christmas with a family is just like not where it's at. Anyway,
Yeah.
and I remember going back to my Airbnb that night and just feeling so sad. And actually, there's just no other word for it. I was so sad I could barely sleep. And it's the first time I've had that experience of sort of being kept awake by grief. And it was a really difficult night. And then Justin, which is why I'm so blessed to be married to him, flew out without my even having to ask, and was like, it's really important for us to be together. And we got through it together. And I have processed a lot, and we had conversations about whether we wanted to continue. And there are various factors that went into play that I won't go into here, but it was the right decision for us and for me to stop. And that was another wave of sadness. But having got through it, I am now really at peace with it. I'm really at peace with the fact that we went as far as we could on that journey for us. And although I will always be sad that I don't have the experience of biological motherhood,
Mm.
I can live alongside that sadness, and I can live a fulfilling and meaningful life. And I can parent in other ways, and I can create in other ways. And I feel that that's magical. I never thought that I would feel this way, but I do. And I'm really passionate about sharing that, in
Mm.
case there's anyone listening who is stuck in the middle of something right now, in the middle of fertility treatment or miscarriage or fear,
Yeah.
that actually there is hope on the other side of this.
That's wonderful. Do you think that when something really sad that's so, as impactful as that happens, that you always carry it with you?
Definitely. The metaphor that I reached for when I was trying to explain it was a big pot of white paint, and a droplet of red paint is a droplet of red falls into the white, and you stir it round, and the white paint is forever changed. It
Yeah.
becomes a version of pink, and it will never be white again, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because actually it just gives you a different color and a different perspective on life. I've completely made that very inelegant and ineloquent, but you get what I
No, it
mean.
is. But I
It's
think about, so I look at when I'm thinking about sadness, just in general, I think about all those famous photographs of Marilyn Monroe that, like, you can see some sadness in
mm,
her eyes, and those photos are so iconic and so beautiful, and they're my favorite photos of her.
yeah.
And in a way, I feel like, just personally, when I think about, amazing women that I admire, or those amazing photos of women that we've lost or whatever, I always feel that for me there's something sort of profoundly beautiful about their sadness, or the
Mhm.
sadness in their eyes, or even when I think about music or writing or whatever, like, experience really informs something quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And when you've, like, lost something that you wanted so much, in a way, you give birth to something which is like a different version of yourself, which is like quite extraordinary. And you've become quite an extraordinary person, probably as a result of all those things.
That is so beautiful.
No, thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
But
That's
it's
so
true.
beautiful.
You're amazing. That's how you've built your career, on being amazing at connecting with people. So maybe you wouldn't have been able to do that had you not have, you don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the funny thing was that when I made the decision to let go of the idea of motherhood, it felt as though I were removing an obstacle. I actually felt so much more aligned with what my path was meant to be.
Mm.
And I've never said that before, but it's so true. And I had an amazing psychic reading. I know
Oh,
you'll be into
did
this.
you?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
go
it
on. When
honestly,
was it?
I had this like, so the failed egg donation round, we learned it was a failure in like beginning of January 2023. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I had the psychic reading in February. So I was rattling around like an emotional pinball. I just didn't know what to do next. And a very good friend of mine recommended this incredible psychic. And the first thing she said was, "Oh, well, you love words."
Oh,
and then
wow.
and then the rest of it just came. And she said this incredibly powerful thing to me where she said, I think you're grappling with letting go of a lifelong desire and you're not sure whether to let it go. Does that resonate? I said, yes. She said, I don't know if it's to do with children, but if it is, I firmly believe that you were a mother in a past life and you were the mother of 6 and it almost undid you.
Yeah.
And this life has been offered to you to live on your own terms. And that's why if you've tried to have children in the past, you might have been confronted with fertility issues or miscarriage, because it's important that you're here doing what you're doing and living this life as you're meant to live it. And it really resonated with me.
That's astonishing, isn't it?
And honestly, Paloma, from that moment, I was at peace with it. It was the weirdest thing. This thing that had really obsessed me, coloured my every interaction for over a decade. I could let go of it. And when she said, I think you've been a mother in the past life, and I think you've been a mother of 6, I actually had 3 miscarriages and 3 rounds of fertility treatment. And so that kind of made sense. I was like, oh, it feels like it's appropriate to stop. So thank you to that psychic.
She sounds amazing.
She is.
Just one question on fertility. Do you think that there's a right way for people to approach your sadness about that? Because
Mm,
I think people are quite sort of tentative. They're not sure how to approach a woman who is openly saying,
yeah.
I wanted children and then I wasn't able to a point where it was enough trying, and then I
Yes.
resolved that I couldn't. Um, is there a way that people can approach that that's wrong? Like, what's the
Mm.
right or wrong thing to say?
That's a really generous and thoughtful question. So thank you for asking it. And I can talk about my experience of it, and it will be different for everyone. But when I was going through fertility treatment, it really did demarcate the friends who were there and the friends who just didn't get it. And very often, women and men are going through fertility treatment at precisely the moment that most of their contemporaries
Oh,
seem
having,
to be,
yeah,
having babies really easily. And so one of the things I would say is you are not going to upset someone by bringing it up. I
mm.
promise you that they are living with this day by day
And
and they're
thinking
thinking
about
about
it
it
anyway.
all the time.
Mm.
Exactly. And actually just saying something like, I'm so sorry that you're going through this is enough and a perfect sentence. Or something like, I can't hope to imagine, but I want you to know that I'm here for you in any way that you need. And that's it. It's sort of enough. It's just someone acknowledging that your pain is valid is really
Mm-hmm.
important. What isn't great, or what wasn't great for me, was someone saying, oh, come round and hang out with the kids.
Yeah.
Why don't you babysit my baby, because that'll be good practice for you. And often it's
Yeah.
so well intentioned, but for me that was the last thing I wanted to do, because it was like being confronted with the thing that I wanted most of all and that I couldn't have.
Yeah.
And so that was really difficult. And now I get people being just really truthful, saying, obviously I love my kids,
But
but yeah, I know there's
yeah.
always that. And I'm like, tell me. And actually, that's been really helpful for me as well. So one of my friends said, my highest value is freedom. And it's the thing that is most restricted by having children.
Yeah.
And another friend said, if you love your partner and you have a healthy relationship and you have children within that, you still love your partner, but it's like they're in a different room in the house perpetually and you can't ever fully get to them. And just things like that have actually been very helpful, because it's made me so grateful for what I do have. I do have freedom and I do have a loving relationship, and we can choose to spend time together and we can choose to go on holiday. And those are all good
Yeah.
things. And I'm not minimizing someone's grief
No.
but it's good to be
Somebody was
grateful.
actually shocked yesterday because I said to them, oh, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to have a child and stay with the child's other parent. And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I get my 2 days off a week.
Yes.
I get 2 days off that I look forward to,
Yeah.
where they're not here.
Yeah.
And then the person was like, oh, as if I'd sort of said that this was terrible. And I'm like, don't get me wrong, of course I love them.
Yeah.
But like, those 2 days are sometimes my favourite days.
Yeah.
Because it's the freedom that you talk about, or the spontaneity, or to be able to go, yeah, I'm going to go. Like the other day I was on Saturday, and I bumped into someone in the street, and they said, well, I'm going to a party. Do you want to come? And I walked halfway there because I could, and then I realised I didn't really want to go to the party. And I just turned around, but I was just
that's
enjoying.
the perfect story. That's the perfect story, because you get all of the joy of knowing you could have been spontaneous.
Yeah.
And then all of the joy of the introversion of just like, no, actually, I just want to go to bed.
Yeah, I did just go to bed.
Bliss.
Have you ever cried in public?
Oh my God, all the time. Are you kidding?
Have you?
I
How
cry
do you
all
feel
the time.
comfortable doing that? Or do you feel like you need to hide?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I cry. It depends how you're defining public. So I cry a lot on my podcast, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, you're quite a moved person. But I mean, like,
but you mean like on the
floods of
tube?
tears,
Yes.
or in a situation where you're kind of probably, it's a bit inappropriate.
I have done that, and I've basically done it when I've been heartbroken. So breakups. I honestly think breakups are a really difficult form of grief. They really are so tough. And I definitely remember being on the Jubilee line once, just sobbing.
Did anyone ask you
No,
if you needed
because it was the
any?
London Tube, so everyone was like, "Oh, let's not look at her." No, but I actually have had really lovely interactions with strangers. Sometimes if you fall over, sometimes in the street, and like I'll be heaving, and then it makes it sound like it happens all the time. But I've definitely had some lovely strangers that help me in moments like that. And
Yeah.
I don't feel bad about crying in public at all. Again, because it's part of what it is to be human. And I would definitely, if I saw me or someone like me crying on the tube, and I would say, "Are you okay?"
Do you need something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like,
How
"It'll
do you
get
feel
better."
about men crying?
All for it.
You love it?
Well, I mean, not if it's causing them pain. Not if they're in pain.
No.
But
like emotionally?
yeah, I think it's so important for everyone of any gender to be in touch with how they're feeling. And the great thing about crying when you're feeling sad is that you are processing it, in that your clever body is processing something. And it means that you're not in denial, and you're not storing it up for a later massive issue. And so Justin, my husband, cries more than I do. I, in a way that I'm a bit competitive about, to be honest, because I always
You've
thought,
had a cry. I haven't had a cry this week.
I always cry at films, and I always thought I was a weeper. And then I met him, and I was like, oh, I've got nothing on him. And I actually think that's, I think it's great, because it just means that I know that when I talk to him about how I'm feeling, he'll get it, and vice versa.
Yeah, let's move on to bad. So we've touched a little bit on breakups, so the ending of relationships. You had a big divorce. I've also had a big breakup with the father of my kids and written about it. And so I think it would be good to sort of touch on that. But then I'd love also to talk about the beginning, when we have bad dates.
Yes. Okay. So bad. The thing that came to mind most quickly for me when I was thinking about this was getting divorced in my mid-30s. And that's not because it was a bad decision. Far from it. It was definitely the right thing. And there was a sense of shame attached to it because of the idea of marriage in my head.
Yeah.
And I felt bad, as in I haven't behaved appropriately, as I should have done, as a sort of socially conditioned, quote unquote, perfect woman who is meant to just stay married and put up and shut up and be the perfect wife and all of that sort of stuff. And I did feel that I failed. And I'm just being really honest about that, because I don't think that now. And I have very different ideas about what fulfilling relationships are and what marriage is. But at the time, I felt that I'd done something bad. So that's definitely what came up for me.
And also, I think, you know, having spoken to you and what little I know, I think we're quite similar in the sense that the word bad's quite uncomfortable for me because I don't think I've ever really been bad in the kind of cliche way. Like I've
Ditto.
always been a little bit of a goody two shoes.
Yeah.
Never really done like what would be expected of me as like a rock and roll star.
Yeah.
I like haven't done any drugs or got drunk. I mean, it's around me everywhere because it's my industry, but I've always just been like quite like, I am the prize. I just want to learn. I just want to live and like digest information. And so I've also been called bad quite often just for being authentic, because it's kind of a strange thing that like, so people would be like, do this, and I'll go, no, I don't think I want to do that. And they say, that's the rules. And I say, well, I'm not comfortable with that, so I'm not going to do it. And then people are like, oh, that's bad. But it's like, is it bad or is it just authentic? So I guess also breakups in a way are lending yourself to your most authentic self, where you're like, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a very authentic decision to remove myself from this relationship. It's not good for me or whatever.
I think you've nailed it, because I think growing up, I confused approval for good behavior with love. So doing well at school, being polite, being well behaved at home, that got me adults' approval. And I thought that was love. And I carried on thinking it for ages. And that had a really negative impact on the way I approached relationships
And life in the future.
and life in general. I was like, of course, yeah. I mean, my default is absolutely, let me say yes, and let me make that as easy as possible for you.
Everyone else, but not me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let me forget what I want. And in my 20s, I was a sickening people pleaser. I mean, it actually makes me feel sick to look back on it, because you think people pleaser, oh, how lovely, how kind, and how thoughtful. But ultimately, for me, it was quite selfish, I think, looking back, because I was trying to control other people's perceptions of me. And I was kind of outsourcing my sense of self to what I thought other people wanted of me. And it meant that I just lost complete touch with my desires, to the extent that I always remember this, dating a very nice boyfriend in my 20s. And he said, where do you want to go for lunch? And I'd be like, I don't know, where do you want to go? And I literally did not know, because I didn't want to claim my desire. I didn't want to say, I'd like to go to Nando's.
Yeah.
In case he didn't want to, and then he'd think badly of me.
Yeah.
It's so fucked up.
There's a brilliant bit in we were speaking about the film Baby Girl, but there's a brilliant bit in it where she has this revelation that she says sorry to her husband says sorry to her because sexually she's been unfulfilled for 19 years, and she says, it's my fault, I've been pretending to be somebody else for the whole marriage. And I feel like that's what you're touching on a bit. Like it's almost like you sacrifice yourself to such a degree that it's almost like that they're not even falling in love with you because they couldn't know who you are.
Totally. And there were so many things I related to in Baby Girl. And I remember that scene exactly. And then she says, and I was angry with you for not knowing who I was, even though she made it impossible for him to know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the case for lots of women, and maybe men too. There's a sense of sort of protection. It's a protection mechanism. Like, if no one really knows who I am, then I'm going to be safe, because if they discover who I am and they discover that I'm mad, bad and sad, then they're going to run a mile. And actually, that does not serve you. Not being authentic in a relationship is far more likely to break that relationship up.
Yeah, when they finally realise, or you finally reveal yourselves to each other. Do you want to tell me a bad date?
I 100% want to tell you all about bad dates.
Because I can't wait for your podcast.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but I want to put work out into the world that would have helped me when I was going through the stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was really passionate about launching How to Fail, because I felt like a failure at the time that I launched it. And then I launched a podcast called How to Write a Book. And I was passionate about that because when I first wrote a book, I didn't really know what I was doing. And now it's How to Date, which I'm co-hosting with Mel Schilling. And if I had had this in my late 30s when I was on Bumble and OK Cupid and having real life hookups, it would have helped me so much. And it would have helped me navigate just the series of disappointments that my online dating experience was, until the final one, which we'll get onto. But yeah, I just found it horrendous, and I know it's got even worse.
I'm sure you had lots of
Yes,
bad ones.
actually, very often the really bad ones are quite middle of the road. Because exactly as you said, like, I was so capable of inventing the most glorious narrative about what this person would be and how it was meant to be, and it was fate and everything had led me to this
Yeah.
before even meeting. And I had to stop myself from Googling. I sort of had a rule that I wouldn't do that. But my best friend Emma, who I mentioned earlier, is like a lady detective.
And was Googling.
She was incredible. I would give her the name. I'd be like, he's called Tom, and he's a cameraman. And she'd call me back in like 20 minutes, be like, did he tell you about his 9-month-old baby in the Hebrides? And I was like, no, how did you find this out?
I love
know,
it.
it was amazing. But yeah, very often the worst dates are the ones where you've built it up in your head and then you meet them and you walk in and they have put a really flattering photo of themselves on the app. And then you walk in and you instantly realise there's no chemistry whatsoever.
Also, I'm not being like, you know, I'm quite a small person, so that doesn't happen to me as often, but you're quite a tall lady, and I'm sure that you arrived on some dates with people that were like up to here on you.
I did,
which isn't that attractive for you.
I think that they are, you know, I love a short king, but I did have a date with someone who was considerably shorter than I was, and I really liked him, and I spent a lot of time like Googling celebrity height differences, like Nicole Kidman, Keith Urban, Nicolas Sarkozy, Carla Bruni, Sophie Dahl, Jamie Cullum.
Yeah.
And so I made myself feel okay about it. But when we came to kiss, it was just a logistical thing. I just did not know what to do with my hands. And in the end, I ended up...
Put them on his shoulders.
Yeah. Like,
did you? Oh no!
Just like resting them gently on his shoulders, and it felt really... I was like, this is... It
was like a dog had put its forelegs on your shoulders like a Great Dane, and you were like...
Or like one of those trays, you know, there's like dog trays where you get a little dog standing up and they've got a tray that you put your cocktail on. It was like that. Yeah,
that's bad.
But I remember one particularly bad one, and he was quite intense very quickly, to the extent that it goes back to what we were talking about, that I felt I owed him something. He was sort of treating me like a girlfriend 2 dates in. And I remember on our 3rd or 4th date, we went out and I was a bit like, in my head, I was like, but it's nice to be needed, isn't it? It's nice to be wanted, even though it felt quite oppressive.
Yeah.
Red flag number 1, staying with his parents.
Oof. Yeah.
And I went back to mine, and then he came round later and he buzzed on the buzzer downstairs on the intercom, and I let him up, and he appeared at my door with a rolled up futon under his arm. And I was like, oh, are you going somewhere? He was like, no, I just find your bed really uncomfortable, so I brought my own because I've got lower back pain. I was like, okay. And so he came in, and this is like, I'm so ashamed to admit it, but we had sex. and then he just like rolled off the bed onto this laid out futon like he was a sort of faithful dog breathing his last breath.
Next to your bed.
Next to my bed. And I was in a tiny flat, and there was literally only about sort of a foot between the bed and the window. And he was sort of down there. It was so strange. And I remember trying to convince myself that it was okay and normal. And I was like, you know, it's
that's what we do, though. That's the problem.
Constantly.
Is like ignoring the signal.
I was like, you know, but it's really good that he understands his needs, and that he's taking positive action to ensure that his lumbar spine is in neutral. Like, good for him. I could learn from it. Anyway, I remember falling asleep and then waking up with a start in the middle of the night, like sitting bolt upright in my bed. And there was this clear, calm voice in my head saying, this man cannot be your boyfriend.
Yeah.
It's like, get out now. What are you doing? Yeah. And I just had this moment of clarity. And I woke up the next morning and I said, can we talk? He was like, I can't talk right now. I need to get back. I need to roll out my futon and go.
Nah.
Can we speak later? And then I called him on the phone. He was like, I can't talk right now. I need to go to the loo. Can I call you back? I was like, okay. And then he was like, I think I know where this conversation's going. Can we meet in person? So then we meet.
Oh my God,
I
he was
know.
really dragging it out.
It was so intense. So then we meet a couple of hours later in this local coffee shop, and I say, it's not
I
you,
just
it's
want to
me.
say for the listeners, it's a shame that you didn't say no at that point before having to meet in person. Like,
Yes.
no, actually, I need to say this now
Yes.
because it's important.
Exactly that.
Rather
and
than
if I did it
going
again,
to meet him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You do not have to do that.
No, you don't owe
you can
anyone
say,
anything.
Yes. You can say no at the point they turn up with a futon. They turn up with a camp bed. Like, just say no then. Anyway, we met in person and I said, this is the situation. I'm just not ready. And he said, well, as long as you don't change your mind, because in 6 months' time, your ovaries will have dried up and I won't be interested. And I was like, okay, I was right to make this call. I was right to make this call.
You were so right. I think sort of to round that whole kind of advice bit up, and obviously everyone's got to listen to your podcast to get proper advice.
Thank you.
But like, I would say definitely the thing about your gut instinct and how we've like become attuned to sort of ignoring our gut instinct. And you're usually right. Like, I actually, one of the podcasts from this series where I spoke to Mel B, realised that I've dodged a few bullets because she talks about coercive control and how she ended up in an abusive relationship. And I was listening to her say, oh, these were the early signs, and I ignored them. And I was like, thank God I didn't ignore them in certain people that I did date, because I had a gut feeling like this feels a bit toxic or whatever.
Yeah. Part of the serious reason behind How to Date is that we are on a mission, Mel and I, to make dating better. And we've got this good dating pledge that you can sign up to on thepodclass.co.uk. And it's full of things like, I commit to never ghost. I commit to clear communication.
Yeah.
And that starts with yourself. It starts with trusting yourself and communicating clearly with yourself. Because ultimately, if we make dating better, it serves everyone. It's good dating karma. If you can have clear communication with that person, it might make them into a better dater for the next person who goes on a date with them.
Yeah.
And so we're really passionate about that.
I'm going to sign me up.
Oh, but I'm excited about your new...
Well, let's see.
Are you boyfriend, girlfriend? Yeah.
Boy.
Okay.
Let's see. Just to end, I like to end on a high, because they've all been quite high with you, I think, actually. But glad, just because it rhymes. What makes you glad?
My cat makes me glad. I love my cat so much. And
more than Justin?
Well, it's a close one. No, I think Justin just about edges it. But at the moment, Justin's away for work. And so Huxley, our cat, has really been looking after me. He's such a protector. And it's like he goes around the house with a little clipboard. Not literally, but I can imagine him like that. He just likes to check up on me and check up where I am and that I'm okay. And then he can go down and have a little sleep because he's had a very busy day.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy his company. And he's a great cat. He's very sociable. He's never, ever scratched me or anyone. And he's just really cuddly. And he's the cat that converts dog people to catdom, which I know everyone says about their cat, but it's actually true with Huxley. He's very, very sociable. Aww. And so he makes me very glad when I get to just ruffle his fluffy tummy.
It's the simple pleasures.
It is.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And it was nerve-wracking because you are my favourite podcaster.
Oh, Paloma.
So I'm really honoured to have you, and you've been amazing.
I'm so flattered. Thank you so much for having me on. And this has been such an amazing conversation, as it always is with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That
honestly,
was so much fun.
The roller coaster of life.
I know.
That's what it is, isn't it?
This was an excellent date.
It was one of my favourite
See what
dates.
I did there?
Yeah. I wish they were all like you.
Ditto. Thank you, darling.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Get home safely.
I will.
I know it's a bit of a trek.
Take care. Bye.
Life, darling.